The scent of lavender and freshly laundered sheets filled the quiet room. At 68 years old, my hands were not as quick as they once were, but they had a purpose, a rhythm born of 45 years of building a home. I smoothed the last wrinkle from the floral bedspread, a small, triumphant smile gracing my lips. The guest room, a place of transient visits and forgotten boxes, was now a sanctuary. We had painted the walls a soft, calming shade of ivory, hung new lace curtains that billowed gently in the breeze, and arranged a small bookshelf with all of Mother's favorite titles, those worn, well-loved paperbacks she carried with her everywhere. Mother, or Eleanor as the family called her, was arriving in 3 days. Her heart had grown weary, and the doctor had insisted she could no longer live alone. Arthur and I had agreed, without a moment's hesitation, to welcome her into our home. It was the only thing to do. She had given so much to us, to our family. It was our turn to give back, to provide her with the comfort and peace she so richly deserved in her twilight years. This room was my offering, a physical manifestation of my love and dedication. Every detail was deliberate, every choice made with her in mind. The soft rug underfoot, the sturdy armchair by the window, the single yellow rose in a small vase on the nightstand, all were small gestures meant to whisper a welcome she could feel in her bones. I leaned against the freshly painted door frame, a wave of profound exhaustion washing over me. It was not a bad exhaustion, but a satisfying one. A deep weariness that settles in after a long day of meaningful work. I thought of Arthur. He had been so supportive, or so I had believed. He had promised to help me with the move, to be here for the big reveal of the newly transformed room. I wanted to see his face light up with pride, to share this quiet, beautiful moment with him. He was 70 years old, my partner for half a century, and I craved his presence more than anything. My feet, heavy with fatigue, carried me down the hall towards his study. I heard the faint murmur of his voice before I reached the closed door. A video call, I presumed. He often had them for his little investment hobby, a pastime he had picked up after retiring from his old firm. I paused outside the door, my hand raised to knock, and the words that drifted through the thin wood brought me to a sudden, painful halt. "Oh, Bethany," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate purr I had not heard in years. It was a sound that belonged to a younger man, to a different time, to a person I had thought I knew completely. "I miss seeing you in person. This small screen does you no justice." A cold, unfamiliar dread began to coil in my stomach, like a serpent waking from a long slumber. My hand fell to my side. I pressed my ear against the wood, a terrible, desperate need to hear more overriding my sense of dignity. "You have been a godsend, you know that?" Arthur continued, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "All of this stress with Alara and her mother. It is just too much. You are the only one who understands." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Stress? Too much? The room I had poured my heart and soul into just moments ago felt like a cruel joke. He had called it stress. He had spoken of our shared duty to my mother with the same weary resignation one might use to describe a persistent toothache. "Oh, my dear Arthur," a woman's voice, smooth and young, cooed in response. It was not a voice I recognized. "I am always here for you. We can go away for the weekend, as soon as your situation is settled." The word situation hung in the air, a venomous fly buzzing in the quiet of my home. My home. It no longer felt like my home. It felt like a stage, and I was merely a prop in a play I did not understand. A searing, white-hot pain shot through my chest, a pain far more acute than any physical ache. It was the pain of utter, complete betrayal. The world outside the study door, the world of my serene guest room and my loving preparations, shattered into a million sharp, unforgiving pieces. I backed away silently, my every footstep a thunderous crash in my ears. I felt faint, as if the very air had been sucked from the house. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. Bethany. A weekend away. My situation. Arthur had been so good at hiding it. His late nights in the study, his frequent errands that lasted for hours, his sudden impatience with me. It all made a sickening, crystal-clear sense now. I had attributed it all to the stress of Mother's impending move, to the natural wear and tear of a long life. But it was not that at all. It was something far more deliberate, far more cruel. I stumbled into the living room and sank onto the sofa, the plush cushions offering no comfort. My mind, usually a fortress of calm and logic, was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Disbelief warred with a bitter, dawning clarity. He had not just betrayed me, he had used my own kindness against me. He had used my devotion to my mother as a cloak for his deception. He was not just cheating, he was gaslighting me, painting me as a burden, as the source of his unhappiness, to this other woman. The next 3 days were a waking nightmare. I moved through our home like a ghost, an unwanted inhabitant in a place I had spent a lifetime building. Arthur seemed oblivious to the change in me. He would smile and ask if I was excited for Mother's arrival, a question that felt like a sharp jab to my wounded heart. The sheer audacity of his act, the brazen way he continued his life as if nothing was wrong, was a kind of psychological torture. I wanted to scream, to weep, to smash every piece of fragile china we had collected over the years, to force him to see the pain he had inflicted. But I did not. I could not. I was a woman of 68, not a fire youth. I was Alara, a pillar of my family, the one who held everything together. And I could not, would not break. Mother's arrival was a whirlwind of activity, a blessed distraction from my internal torment. She was frail, her movements slow and deliberate, but her eyes held a spark of the fierce intelligence I had always admired. We settled her into her new room, and her expression of quiet contentment was a balm to my aching soul. I watched her trace the patterns on the bedspread, her hand hovering over the books on the shelf, and, for a fleeting moment, the pain receded. This was why I had done it all. For her. For the woman who had given me life and love without reservation. But her arrival also brought the conflict to a head. Arthur was a master of passive aggression. He would sigh heavily whenever Mother needed something, roll his eyes discreetly when she asked him for a glass of water, and complain to me later about her demands. He made it clear, without ever saying the words, that he viewed her presence as an immense inconvenience, a burden that had been placed upon him. It was as if he wanted to punish me for my devotion to my own mother. He was using her illness as a tool, a weapon to make me feel small and powerless. One evening, I overheard him on the phone, again with Bethany. He was in the garage, thinking I was busy with Mother. My heart, still raw from the initial discovery, ached anew as I listened. "I cannot believe I have to deal with this," he said, his voice laced with a bitter resentment. "Alara has turned into her mother's personal servant. It is exhausting just to watch." The words were a physical blow. Exhausting? He had done nothing but complain and make veiled jabs. I was the one doing everything. I was the one changing her sheets, preparing her meals, reading to her, keeping her company. I was the one pouring my energy into caring for my family, while he was pouring his energy into deceiving me. The injustice was staggering. I walked back into the house, a cold, hard knot of anger tightening in my stomach. This was not just a one-time mistake. This was a pattern of behavior, a deliberate choice to be cruel and to use my kindness against me. The betrayal was no longer just about the affair. It was about Alara, the dutiful wife, the loving daughter, the woman who had given so much of herself to this family, being treated as if her love was a burden. The realization was a devastating one, but it was also a clarifying one. The fog of shock and disbelief began to lift, replaced by a searing, crystalline anger. The Alara I had known was gone, replaced by a woman who felt a profound, burning need for justice. The quiet, compassionate woman I had been was now a stranger to myself, a person I no longer recognized. I did not know what I was capable of, but I knew, with an absolute certainty, that I could not, would not, continue to live this way. My heart was broken, yes, but my spirit was hardening into something new, something resolute, something dangerous. The weight of caring was crushing me, but it was also forging me into a new, stronger version of myself. And I knew, with the kind of knowledge that settles in your bones and refuses to leave, that Arthur and his Bethany were not prepared for what was to come. I had been a woman of quiet love and unwavering dedication. Now I was a woman on the edge of a new kind of war, a war for my dignity, my home, and my very soul. And the first battle had just begun. The house, which had always been a bastion of peace and warmth, now felt like a theater of war. A silent, clandestine war fought with pointed glances, heavy sighs, and the deliberate absence of words. Arthur, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant of my transformation, continued his charade with a chilling consistency. He would still, on occasion, place a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that once meant comfort but now felt like an invasion. I would simply nod, a quiet mask on my face, and turn away. My heart, once a fragile vessel of grief, was hardening into a stone of cold, purposeful resolve. Mother's presence, which he had so cruelly labeled a burden, was now my sanctuary. She saw my pain, I knew it. Not the specifics, of course, but the shadows in my eyes, the way my smile no longer reached them. One evening, as I was arranging her pillows, she took my hand. Her skin was thin as parchment, but her grip was firm. "Alara," she said, her voice a soft whisper that cut through the silence of the room. "A quiet spirit can hold the fiercest storm." I looked into her wise, knowing eyes, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt seen. I simply squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement that I understood. The storm had arrived, and I was holding it. The silent war manifested in the small, insidious details of our daily life. Arthur stopped eating at the dining table with us. He would grab a plate, fill it, and retreat to his study, the closed door a physical barrier between us. He claimed he was working, but I knew. I knew he was on the phone or on a video call with Bethany, filling her ears with lies about his stressful home life. He was no longer trying to hide it. He was making it clear that his life, his true life, was happening elsewhere. The worst came one afternoon when I was preparing lunch for Mother. The kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of chicken soup, a recipe she had loved since childhood. I was chopping vegetables when Arthur walked in. He did not ask about the soup or its recipient. He simply opened the pantry and let out a theatrical sigh. "There is no more coffee," he announced, his voice laced with the same passive-aggressive complaint he used for everything related to Mother. "I guess I will have to go out and get some." "The coffee is on the top shelf, Arthur," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. He had been a coffee drinker for 50 years. He knew where the coffee was kept. He was not looking for coffee. He was looking for a reason to complain, a way to make me feel inadequate. He did not even look at me. He just slammed the pantry door shut. "I have already told you, Alara, I cannot reach the top shelf anymore. My back is not what it used to be." His words were a direct jab at his age, a pathetic attempt to elicit sympathy while simultaneously feigning feebleness. The man was a monster of his own making, a creature of vanity and deceit. That night, as I lay in my separate bed in our once shared room, a fierce anger replaced the remnants of my pain. He was not just cheating. He was actively, maliciously trying to make me feel like a burden. He was using his age, and my mother's illness as weapons against me. This was not a moment for tears or sadness. This was a moment for action. The first step was logical. I had to understand what I was up against. I had to know the true extent of his betrayal. While he was in his study, I went to his desk and began to look. He was a creature of habit, and his passwords were a reflection of that. I tried our old wedding date. It failed. I tried the date of our first kiss. It failed. Then, on a whim, I tried something I never would have considered before. I tried his date of birth, followed by the initials of the woman on the phone, Bethany. The screen unlocked instantly. A cold, sick feeling washed over me, but I pushed it down. This was not the time for emotion. This was the time for knowledge. I began to look through his files. My mind worked with a speed I had not felt since my days managing the family budget years ago. I found a file named Investments. I opened it. The list of assets and accounts was extensive. Far more extensive than I had ever known. But one account, a joint account he had opened, caught my eye. It was empty. The balance was 0. I clicked on the transaction history. My breath caught in my throat. Every single transaction, Every dollar that had been in the account had been transferred to a new account, a private one, in the name of Bethany Thorne. The transfers had been happening for months, slowly and methodically. He had been draining our joint savings, our retirement, our security, and transferring it to this woman. The scale of the betrayal was breathtaking. He had not just cheated on me. He was robbing me. He was robbing us of our future, of our hard-earned retirement. My hands began to tremble, but it was not from fear. It was from a quiet, righteous fury. He had stolen more than money. He had stolen a lifetime of trust, of sacrifice, of mutual respect. He had taken our shared dream and sold it for his own selfish pleasure. The pain of the affair, which had felt so immense, now seemed insignificant compared to this colossal betrayal. This was not just about him leaving me for another woman. This was about him leaving me with nothing. I took out my phone and began to take pictures of every single document, the transaction history, the account numbers, the dates. I was a quiet whirlwind of efficiency. I was no longer the frail old woman he saw me as. I was a data analyst, an investigator, a woman with a purpose. He thought he had a secret, but he had just given me the map to his downfall. I worked quickly, silently, my heart pounding a steady rhythm of purpose in my chest. When I was done, I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I closed the door to his study and walked back into the silent war zone of our home, a new kind of weapon in my hand. He had thought he was so clever. He had used my love and my kindness as a shield for his deceit. But what he did not know, what he could never have known, was that his deception had not broken me. It had liberated me. I went to Mother's room. She was sleeping peacefully, a small, serene smile on her face. I stood over her, a quiet sentinel, and I made a silent promise to myself, to her, and to the years of love and sacrifice that had been so ruthlessly discarded. Arthur believed he was winning. He believed he was the master of his domain. But he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated the resolve of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The silent war had just turned into a fight for survival, and I was no longer fighting with empty hands. The next move was mine. The morning after my discovery, a strange calm settled over me. The turmoil in my heart had been replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. I no longer looked at Arthur as my husband. I looked at him as an opponent. The man who sat across from me at the breakfast table, engrossed in his phone, was a stranger. A dangerous one. He did not notice the subtle change in my posture, the purposeful way I drank my tea, the cold clarity in my eyes. He was too consumed by his own petty deceptions to see the woman he had underestimated. My first move was to secure our financial future, what was left of it. I had been a homemaker for most of our married life, but I was not ignorant. I had managed our household budget for years, and I had a firm understanding of where our money was, or rather, where it had been. I found the file on his computer with the account numbers and dates of all the transfers. The names were right there, Arthur's account and Bethany Thorne's account. This was not a quick fling, this was a calculated, long-term theft. My rage was no longer hot and fiery, it was a cold, methodical blade. I dressed in my best clothes, a simple but elegant gray suit that I had not worn in years, and went to the bank. It was a place I had visited 100 times before, a symbol of our shared life and our shared plans for retirement. Today, it felt like a battlefield. I sat across from Mr. Henderson, our longtime bank manager, a kind and gentle man who had known Arthur and me for decades. He smiled warmly. "Alara, how wonderful to see you. How is Arthur?" I smiled back, a polite, distant smile that did not reach my eyes. "Arthur is well, thank you, Mr. Henderson. I am here to discuss our finances." He looked surprised. "Arthur usually handles these matters." "He does," I said, my voice as steady as the desk between us. "But a woman should know where her money is, should she not? I am here to do a complete audit of all our joint accounts." He could not refuse my request. As a signatory on the accounts, I had every right. But I could see the suspicion in his eyes, a dawning realization that something was not right. I gave him the list of accounts I had found on Arthur's computer, including the one that had been drained. As he scrolled through the transactions, his face went from polite interest to deep concern and, finally, to utter shock. His gaze flickered from the screen to me, a silent question in his eyes. "This is all the information I have," I said, keeping my voice low and firm. "I trust you will be discreet, Mr. Henderson. My husband does not know I am here." He nodded slowly, a grim expression on his face. "Of course, Alara. I will look into this immediately. I will let you know what I find." I left the bank feeling a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. The first blow had been struck, but the victory felt hollow. This was not a game. This was my life, my retirement, my home, all of which had been stolen from me by the man I had loved. Back at home, Arthur was still in his study. He did not ask where I had been. He did not notice the subtle change in my demeanor. His silence was not just a symptom of his deceit, it was a weapon. He used it to make me feel invisible, to make me doubt myself. But his silence no longer had power over me. It was now a sign of his weakness, his self-absorption, and his complete ignorance of the storm I was brewing. My next step was more personal. While he was at his weekly poker game with his friends, I went to our safe. A small, black box we had had for years, tucked away in the back of the closet. Inside were all the important documents, our will, our deeds to the house, and our marriage certificate. I took out the will, a document we had drawn up decades ago, leaving everything to each other and then to our children. I made a mental note to change it as soon as possible. My children had shown me that I could not trust them. I had to protect myself and my mother. Then I took out our marriage certificate. It was a beautiful piece of parchment, yellowed with age, a testament to 50 years of a life I had thought was a fairy tale. I looked at it for a long time, and a single tear, the first one I had shed in days, rolled down my cheek. This was it. The end of a life I had so cherished. The dream was shattered, but the reality was just beginning. I took the deed to the house, an old, wrinkled document that held the weight of a lifetime of memories. This house was my sanctuary, the place where I had raised my children, where I had loved and laughed and cried. He wanted to take it from me, to use it to finance his little affair with Bethany. He had no idea how wrong he was. The house was not just a building, it was a symbol of my strength. And I would not let him take it. I replaced the documents, the marriage certificate now feeling like a mockery, and a new plan began to form in my mind. A plan that was bigger, more complex, and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. This was no longer just about financial security. This was about justice. It was about showing Arthur and Bethany that they had not only stolen our money, but had also awakened a force they did not understand. I was not a frail old woman. I was a guardian of my own destiny, and I would not rest until I had reclaimed everything they had stolen from me. I went to Mother's room. She was sitting in her armchair, a book in her lap. She looked up at me, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. She had known all along. Not the specifics, but the pain, the betrayal, the quiet storm brewing within me. I said nothing. I just sat down on the bed, and we remained in a comfortable, silent solidarity. We were two women, weathered by time and sorrow, but not yet broken. And I knew, with a fierce certainty, that with her as my anchor, I could weather the storm and emerge on the other side, victorious. The Sunday dinner felt like a ticking bomb. The scent of roasted chicken and fresh bread, the sound of polite conversation, the warm, low light from the chandelier, all of it felt like a theatrical stage set for a tragedy. Arthur had insisted on this gathering, a grand, performative gesture to show our children, our grandchildren, and our extended family that everything was as it should be. It was, I knew, a way for him to assert his dominance, to publicly display the false image of a happy, prosperous man. He had even invited his new business partner, a young woman with sharp eyes and a nervous smile whom I immediately recognized as Bethany Thorne. The audacity of his actions was breathtaking. He was in his element, holding court at the head of the long oak table, telling a story about a lucrative investment deal. The family, a chorus of polite laughter and impressed murmurs, hung on his every word. I sat at the other end, next to Mother, who was unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on the young woman sitting opposite her. Mother's mind might have been failing her, but her intuition was as sharp as ever. She saw something I had seen in that first moment of discovery, a parasite in our home. I had come prepared. My purse, a small black clutch I carried for special occasions, contained not a lipstick or a wallet, but the printed bank statements, the transfer records, and a notarized copy of the deed to our house, now held in a new, separate legal entity. I was no longer an actor in his play. I was the director, and the curtain was about to fall on his performance. I waited for a lull in the conversation. When Arthur paused to take a sip of wine, his face flushed with the pride of his own lies, I cleared my throat. The sound was soft but commanding. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. "That is a lovely story, Arthur," I began, my voice clear and steady. The words, so simple and polite, seemed to hang in the air, charged with an unspoken meaning. "I must confess, I have also been making some investments of my own." Arthur's smile faltered. His eyes, for the first time in weeks, were no longer clouded by self-absorption. They were filled with a flicker of suspicion, a dawning realization that he had lost control of the script. "What do you mean, Alara?" he asked, a forced chuckle escaping his lips. "What kind of investments are you talking about?" "The kind that ensure my future," I replied, and the coldness in my voice sent a shudder through the room. I reached into my purse and took out the documents. I did not raise my voice. I did not shout. I did not weep. My actions were quiet, deliberate, and devastating. I placed the bank statements on the table, sliding them towards my eldest son, David, who sat closest to me. His eyes, filled with confusion at first, widened in horror as he read the numbers. "Arthur," I said, addressing him directly, ignoring the gasps and murmurs that were beginning to erupt from the family. "You see, for the last year, you have been transferring significant amounts of our joint retirement savings to a separate account. An account in the name of—" I paused, my eyes locking with Bethany's. The young woman went pale, her face draining of color as she understood the gravity of my words. "Bethany Thorne." A wave of shocked silence swept through the room. It was a silence so thick and heavy that you could almost taste it. Every single person, from my youngest grandchild to my sister-in-law, was staring at Arthur, then at Bethany, then back at me. Arthur's face was a mask of furious, unadulterated panic. He was no longer the confident, charming host. He was a caught thief, a cornered animal. "Alara, what is this?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "This is a misunderstanding. This is ridiculous. I can explain." "There is nothing to explain," I said, my voice cutting through his feeble protests. "These documents tell the entire story. They show a systematic, premeditated theft. You were not just having an affair, Arthur. You were robbing me. You were robbing us." My gaze swept over my family, over the faces of my children who had been so quick to side with their father, to overlook his coldness, to dismiss my quiet efforts. They saw him now for what he was. Not a loving patriarch, but a common criminal. Bethany, looking as if she were about to faint, tried to speak. "Arthur told me. He said it was his money, that it was a business account." "He lied to you," I said, my tone flat, emotionless. "He lied to all of us." I then took out the second document, the one that held the most power, the new deed to the house. I placed it on the table. "He also, as you all know, has been planning to sell our home to finance his new life," I said, my voice dripping with the tragic irony of it all. "But he will find that difficult now. You see, the house is no longer his to sell. I transferred the deed to my name and my mother's name just last week." The document, crisp and official, lay on the table, a testament to my final, absolute move. Arthur's eyes, wide with disbelief and horror, were fixed on the paper. "This is my home. This is my mother's home. And you, Arthur, are now a guest. You have no right to this house, no claim to its contents, and certainly no power over its future." He tried to stand, to protest, but his legs seemed to give out. He slumped back into his chair, a broken, defeated man. The roar of conversation that followed, a cacophony of questions and accusations, was a symphony of his demise. He was no longer the charming, successful man. He was the betrayer, the thief, the liar. The public humiliation was swift and absolute. My children, my grandchildren, who had sat in silent witness to his cruelty for so long, now saw the truth in a brutal, undeniable light. I looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in what felt like forever. His face was a contorted mess of shock and fury, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. He had thought he was so clever. He had believed he had won. But he had only managed to destroy everything he had, and in his greed, he had underestimated the one person who knew him better than anyone in the world. He had underestimated me. The silent war was over. The battle had been won. But the fight for my new, independent life had just begun. The morning after the dinner, the house was silent. The air, which had been thick with tension and deceit for weeks, felt clean and fresh. Arthur was gone. He had packed a small bag and left in the middle of the night, a coward's retreat from the wreckage he had created. He did not say a word to me. He simply disappeared, leaving a void that was not filled with sadness, but with a profound sense of peace. Bethany had also vanished from the family's lives, a footnote in a story that was now, finally, mine to write. My children came to see me the next day. Their faces were a mix of shame, regret, and relief. They apologized, their words a clumsy but sincere acknowledgement of their blindness and their father's cruelty. My son, David, sat on the sofa, his head in his hands. "Mother," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I should have seen it. I should have believed you." I simply placed a hand on his shoulder. It was not a time for recriminations. It was a time for healing. I told them that the past was gone, and we would now focus on the future. The future, it turned out, was bright. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, had launched an internal investigation. Within a week, the bank had frozen all of Bethany's accounts and filed a report with the authorities. The money Arthur had stolen was traced and recovered, and a significant portion was returned to our account. He had not only lost his wife and his dignity, but he had also lost his freedom. He would face the legal consequences of his actions, a small victory that felt like a powerful act of justice. With the finances restored and the house secured, I began to live. Not just exist, but truly live. Mother's presence was a constant source of joy and comfort. We spent our days gardening, painting, and reading together. The guest room, once a symbol of duty, was now a haven of shared moments and quiet laughter. The house was no longer a battlefield, it was a home again, filled with love and warmth. My children and grandchildren began to visit more often, and our relationships were rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and respect. They no longer saw me as a quiet, compliant woman. They saw me as the matriarch, the strong, wise woman who had saved her family from a crisis of its own making. They came to me for advice, for comfort, for guidance. I was no longer an invisible presence in my own home. I was the pillar, the one who held it all together. I had found a newfound freedom, a sense of independence I had not known I was missing. I sold Arthur's car, the one he had been so proud of, and used the money to take Mother on a trip she had always dreamed of. We traveled to the coast, watching the waves crash against the shore, feeling the sun on our faces, and sharing stories and memories that had been long forgotten. My spirit, which had been so burdened by betrayal, was now soaring. As for Arthur, the last I heard, he was living in a small, rented apartment, stripped of his fortune, his reputation, and his freedom. Bethany had left him as soon as his money was gone, a final, cruel twist of fate that was a perfect reflection of her true character. He had tried to build a new life on a foundation of lies and theft, and it had crumbled beneath him, leaving him with nothing. His greatest revenge had been his own actions, a self-inflicted wound that had left him with an empty existence. My revenge was not his suffering, it was my happiness. It was the joy of watching Mother's eyes light up at the sight of the ocean. It was the laughter I shared with my grandchildren. It was the peace I found in my own home, a peace that was no longer a facade, but a deeply felt reality. I had fought for my dignity, for my home, and for my future, and I had won. I had not just defeated him, I had liberated myself. The sun was rising on a new, beautiful dawn, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.